Hello and welcome to the Sacco Insight podcast, where we are amplifying people's voices. My name is George Ombado, the Executive Director of ACOSCA. Welcome to another Sacco Insight, amplifying people's voices. Today we are glad to have Carl, who is the Vice President of Visa International, working on social impact. We are here to amplify people's voices using the Sacco business model, which other places we call it the credit union model. Carl, welcome to today's episode.
Thank you, George. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So the question that I might want to just begin to ask you, who is Carl?
I am an Ivorian. I was born and raised in Côte d'Ivoire, and then I left when I was 19, moved to Zimbabwe, then South Africa. And I think my time in South Africa was probably one of the most significant part of me growing up, or my journey, because I was at a time where President Thabo Mbeki was leading the country, and the focus on minorities, or let's say people that really need a path to success, was the focus of his presidency. And I learned a lot on how he was very much focused on the continent. And at the time we had President Bouteflika, President of Senegal Wade, President Obasanjo, the four of them all in power, really driving the transformation of the continent. And those remained with me. So at heart, I am an African, with a really simple passion for transforming lives of individuals, but not necessarily from the perspective of what people often refer to as the last mile. I think this is probably the first mile, because nobody comes from the city. We all come from the village. And then we have turned it around to say that, we need to reach the last mile. But for many people, actually, the last mile is the city. So I am someone who's very much interested in understanding how societies evolve and what could be my contribution to that. So, in one word, I'm a learner.
Thank you. Thank you. Having known you and for over these couple of years, one of the things that I've appreciated is, from our perspective, we always say culture is a way of doing things. And one of the things that I've noted, that which you've illustrated, your exposure in the continent, not just because you come from the soil. I've seen you often talking about governments needs to play a role in building sustainable society. The stakeholders need to play a role in building a system that develops the society. What's your current role in this particular space to see that we have an equitable society that is well empowered?
I've had different roles in different organizations. So I started in the development sector with always that keen interest of understanding how resources, regardless of the size, can play a significant role in advancing somebody's fortune. So my first interaction was around HIV, TB and malaria. And it was, how do we make sure that people that have less means have access to antiretroviral? And understanding that process, I became very interested in behavior change. Because ultimately, all the different things that we try to do revolve around changing behaviors. So if you take the Saccos, you want to move someone from being an individual contributor to be part of a community, trusted community, with their hard-earned resources. So my role in this is to identify organizations like ACOSCA that have decided that all these individual contributors need to come together. And how does a company like Visa can actually look at it from different perspectives? Of course, there's a solution piece that is important, but there's also the question around financial inclusion. And what does financial inclusion mean for a woman trader at the border of Kenya and Uganda? Very different to one that might be at the border of Togo and Ghana, or one that will be an urban area. And it's understanding those nuances that really makes us as human in big organization to contribute to something which is much bigger than us.
I'm glad that you mentioned the connection of what we can play a role in providing solutions on development issues. You mentioned health, and now you roll it down on how that can also be embedded on the marginalized group, the young people,
Correct.
and the women. Africa is a young continent. What in your current role, we have the financial inclusion project in Kenya and Tanzania. Some people may ask, oh, why Kenya and Tanzania? Why not other countries? The other thing that we might say, which I like you pointed out, the dynamics of gender disparity. It's different across the continent. What do you see the space that ACOSCA Visa can connect to see that we contribute into reducing gender disparity?
Kenya has demonstrated how the model functions. Saccos. ACOSCA is based in Kenya. Charity begins at home.
Excellent.
You have to make sure that before you go and tell people that this is how it could be done, that you have a proof of concept. So for us, it made sense to ensure that in your home territory and in a country which is very important to Visa, we support that transition.
Excellent.
Tanzania is a technologically advanced market. Young people are very savvy. The sort of cooperative movement is very dense. Women traders on the side of the road and the community that. So looking at these two markets that are both interesting in the composition of a youth competition in different ways, it made sense to actually test this idea in these two markets. So when we think of a continent, it doesn't matter if it starts in Kenya or in Tanzania or in Cote d'Ivoire where I'm from. The point of the matter is that are we able to translate it and pay attention to the nuances that exist in each of these markets and understand that people are already in a certain level. No one in this market starts from zero. They may not have all the resources, but if we pay attention, deepen our understanding and listening to what they are already doing, they are quite advanced. And you touch on the question around health, which will always be very close to my heart, in the sense that we cannot necessarily outsource the health of our people. Meaning you can have the best Sacco in the world, but the individuals are not healthy. The majority of the income will go towards fixing the health problem.
True.
So we know that about 60 to 70%, these are all data from my time, then it may still be the same, of a disposable income is used for health issues. So when we think of development, yes, you can have the transaction that is fixed. You can have the agriculture that is fixed. But if individuals are not healthy, we run into the problem of having the prospect of a demographic dividend, which may never realize itself. So you speak about the young African population. Yes, there are a lot of young Africans on the continent that are vibrant, that are really trying to contribute differently. But did we ask ourselves the question whether these children are not suffering from chronic malnutrition or if they're not stunted? So stunting actually reduces the ability of children, or as they grow older, to actually fully participate in the economy. So there was a report that was written a couple of years ago called The Cost of Hunger, which was basically put in front of ministers of finance to remind them that the demographic dividend may be at risk because of the health issues that are really slowly eroding the capacity. So health is a central piece of the conversation. And if we learn from Ebola in West Africa, COVID-19 or HIV, we were able to succeed because behavior was changed. So how can we change behaviors through the Sacco movement in terms of the saving culture, in terms of investment culture, in terms of the consumer protection culture? So if you go back to health, you had to change your behavior to prevent from HIV. what are the consumer protection that we need to put in place? It has to be cybersecurity, for example. A lot of people, young people online, but are they protected when they're online? And that, for me, is really the different elements that we need to make sure that we look at it as a holistic approach to the transformation of individuals, which will then transform the country. Professor Were from Kenya used to say that when it happens in the community, it happens in the nation. You can translate it to, if it happens in the Sacco, it will happen across the country, and why not across the continent?
I like the way you explain that what happens in the community affects the nation. The Sacco business model begins from a community.
Absolutely.
Where there's membership, then membership come together, form a Sacco, then at the national level. One of the things that you mentioned, which has always been problematic to us, particularly on how to solve, when you look at health, for instance, I'll just come back to health because there's health and there's housing, which consume a huge percentage of household income. The recent studies show that their financial wellness is directly related to our health.
Correct.
There's so much depression in most of the African society. And we see a lot of either behavior that either people are struggling in terms of how they use their finances, how they receive credit, for instance, and that may be affecting them too. Visa International, you've been playing a key role in providing payment solutions. I like the linkage of payment solution, but also you're looking at social impact.
Correct.
Yeah. So what are the opportunities that are there to tie payment solution to see that it provides equality and not inequality?
The link, as you indicate, between an individual ability to project themselves in the future, which is the wellness part, is very much related to the financial situation. If you wake up in the morning and you're not guaranteed to have the meals that are required for you to be, the nutrition that is required for you to contribute to society, you're not too sure if your child can go to school, the pressure that you have as an individual has consequences. And when I used to live in Togo, I used to watch from where I used to say, a young boy that was coming with his mother to sell porridge by the side of the road. And every morning he would do exactly the same thing. For me, what I saw there is a young boy who is actually learning about the meaning of hard work and how that work is actually helping him to transform his own life. We don't often talk about this element of how our societies are built in a way that you as an individual, by learning from the community, you're actually picking up elements to become stronger and resilient. Financial education is a key part of what we try to make sure that every person that has access to financial services and those that are coming into the financial services receive. Because financial education is about the future. It's really about thinking about how do you get to a certain place and how do you delay gratifications so that you can enjoy the fruits of the labor. Maybe not you, but the community at large and the rest. So for the financial wellness of an individual, we really have to look at the different components, which has to do with skills, so financial education of other means, what people learn from the community, from the mothers like this young boy, what an institution like Visa can provide in terms of consumer protection, cybersecurity, because if all your savings are wiped away because you were not prudent online, and the institution that chose to provide you financial services did not put in place the correct measure to protect the institution, there is a cost to the health, the well-being of individuals, and that's what we're trying to preserve.
I like when you mention about consumer protection. Again, this is an area that most stakeholders do not focus on. We just think people need financial
Correct.
service or financial help without looking at their needs actually protected after getting the services. We will all agree that Africa is a continent of young people. If you are to advise the young people on how do they get empowered, like what you illustrated about the young person in Togo, without waiting for the government. Because at times people say, oh, the government should help us provide employment. But if employment is there, it is not there, what are the areas that young people can be either supported or directed to see that their financial wellness is actually improved?
I have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. And I remind them every day that the education is their inheritance. That's what my father told me. And education doesn't have to be formal, but you have to constantly be learning.
Powerful.
And we don't necessarily value, and we don't actually know how to value the learnings that people have outside of education, of a formal education system. When I lived in Ghana, people used to complain about traffic like they do in Nairobi. But you observe in the traffic that you have individuals that are selling. They created an employment for themselves out of the misery of drivers. Did we ever ask any of these young people to come and talk to us about entrepreneurship? No. Because we don't think of them as entrepreneurs, but they are entrepreneurs. Somebody walking with a bucket on their head selling water or selling, which is cold in a hot, humid climate. They had to think about the supply chain. Without the supply chain, they will not be selling there. And I think that's a part that sometimes we miss about the African continent, that young people are doing extraordinary things, sometimes in very difficult conditions. But if we find a way to actually document and tell the stories, and not just focus on a few entrepreneurs that are only in tech, we will look at the continent from a very different perspective.
That's quite powerful when you mention that education does not necessarily have to be formal.
Correct.
Because we have this assumption in the continent, which could be a blanket statement, but most people believe having that certificate is life and death, and they forget about the other component of education. This comes back to women. You see in the continent of Africa, at times women, even at a younger age, girls do not, some families will say, if I only have X amount of resources for education, which is not a public good in our space, they rather pay for the boy child to go to school than the girl child. The trends might be changing. What is your perception about women and education and women and empowerment that affects them to date?
I was raised by a very strong woman who never finished school. She was a nurse, and she really did what she could with what she had. So it's not a either or. We have a responsibility to make sure that every single person has access to education. Formal, informal, whichever one to call it, they have to have access to education. For a very simple reason. We do have more than 50% of the world population which are women. So if we ignore the skills and competencies that they can bring to the transformation of the world, and especially the transformation of the African continent, we're gonna fail as a continent. And all these women, or young girls or women, are responsible for you and I sitting here. If it wasn't for my mother, I would not be here.
Sure.
So looking at it from that perspective, it's our duty, wherever we see inequality or inequity in terms of access, to do what we can. If it means supporting the family to send that child to school, according to our means, we should do it. I always go back to the individual's role and responsibility in transforming a society. We can't expect everything from government. Governments have lots of things to do. But if, as an individual, you have a means to support one extra person to go to school, one extra person to learn, you should do it. Without expecting anything in return. I think that's the key part. And not waiting to have your page on the front page of a newspaper to say that I've helped X number of girls. Because it's those silent supporters that exist in our communities that are transforming them without necessarily the headlines, but with conviction that these young girls that they supported will go and make a difference.
You touched the nerve on the upbringing, and your upbringing has actually positively affected who you are today.
Absolutely.
And that's very, very clear from our seen you interact and even the way you've explained it. My last thought, which then goes into how you can advise other stakeholders, particularly the Saccos, on how they can work to see that women and young people voices are not only heard, but how do they develop products and services that then will support this particular group. And you will be speaking to audience across the continent and perhaps all over the world.
It's really about listening and observing what would my contribution do to enhance the life of this person. We often put ourselves in a position where we want to sell a product because that's what we have. But the stronger position is to really ask the person, how would your life be better? And with what? People usually know what might help them because today information is available. 20 years ago, you may have to look into a dictionary. Now it's available. People can see how China has developed.
True.
They can see how Latin America is transforming. They can see the waves that have happened in Europe and the Western world. And they can choose that this is what makes sense to me. And do we have organizations and leadership in the circles that are spending a little bit more time to listen? Remember that the movement started with a group of people coming together, listening to each other and saying, I trust that if I put X amount of money, when my turn comes, this money will come to me. So that I can build something in the community that will benefit me and the others. Being opening a shop, building a house, whatever it is. So we should not forget how and why it started. No matter how big these institutions have become. That, for me, is a key part.
Thank you. And again, as I started this episode, you illustrated that you walk the talk. You will illustrated that even Visa International, an institution that you are connected to, you are not just talking about products and services.
Correct.
You're talking about how do you help community. And since you started engaging with the Coscan Visa, we've seen you're always concerned about providing solutions. What is the impact on the projects that you're doing? For that, this ends our episode of Sacco Insight, where we are amplifying people's voices. We were privileged and honored to have Carl, who is the Vice President on Social Impact at Visa International. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.